Good morning. Do you know the cost of being diagnosed with any form of cancer? Do you know the cost of being diagnosed with breast cancer in the Caribbean? Do you know the cost of being diagnosed with cancer in the world? Do you know the course that it takes? Do you know what care is involved? And do you know that we can make this journey a triumphant one? The course can be tiresome. It's like a race course where you find that you have hurdles along the way. Those hurdles can be financial, they can be emotional, and they can be in terms of your community. So one of the things that the journey entails is making sure that we understand the course. It's a difficult thing to understand and to accept. And then the care is demanding. We have to understand what the care entails, who are the participants in our care, and what is going to be the duration and the process of our care. And then the costs are more than financial. The costs are emotional. The costs are accepting. The costs also entail understanding the journey. And the costs further entail making sure that we have the right support systems. This can be very tiring. So we go back to the course. In the value chain of health, there are many participants and there are many needs. And first of all, we have to understand educating and opening up dialogues for communities to participate. We have to understand the dietary and nutritional needs of every participant in the growth of a nation. We have to also understand that healthy lifestyles, practices, and self-care are all critical to a developing nation, a developing country, a developing society, and a developing world. We have to establish and accept affordability of healthcare. And until that is created inside of spaces where citizens are able to access basic healthcare regimes, then this is going to be a challenge globally and societally. We have to look at what the infrastructure is in that access to care. Are all the ducks lined up in a row? Or do we have to go to one place to get one service, to go far on the other end of the island for another service? And how do we put everything together and put it all into one space? We also have to understand, is there an ease of access to these very professionals, the healthcare professionals? And in accessing them, are we also accessing the information that they will supply to us? And is this information readily available for us? And this is how we invest in sustainable development. There's an impact in a diagnosis that we sometimes do not see, or we sometimes miss because we're focused on just the individual being diagnosed. But when someone falls ill and gets to a critical diagnosis, in the productivity scale for an individual, it then redounds to absenteeism. Not just in the workplace, but absenteeism even in the home space. When a woman is absent from her space, there's an impact on her family, there's an impact on her peers and her co-workers. And this turns out to actually contribute to burnout in income and benefits. If she's a breadwinner in the household, she's no longer able to participate in active work, and this contributes to burnout in her income or capacity to earn, and in the benefits that she would have access to. And that in turn contributes to a decline in productivity. With a decline in productivity, it means that there's also a fall-off in terms of how things are done and completed and delivered. And then is their ability to afford health care because of the burnout of the income due to absenteeism, due to a critical diagnosis from falling ill. And if that inability to access or afford health care, it then decreases the quality of life. Because now we look at poverty, We look at issues with regard to how the income burnout has affected diet, has affected the ability to be nutritionally taken care of, and in terms of even things like paying the rent, and all of those other things that will apply to quality of life. Then there becomes a family burden. And if there's an insurance program, either national insurance or private and personally owned insurance, there's also a burden on the insurance policy. Because some insurance policies may cover some, but not all ailments, not all requests in terms of what needs to be actually compensated for. So there's a high cost to falling ill. In terms of productivity in the workforce, or in the nation, from a national perspective, if we have an ailing population due to malnutrition, bad nutritional practices, poor soil, which will affect agriculture, and all of those other challenges, you find that there's going to be a complete decline in the national productivity levels. There will therefore be capacity decline in terms of the country's capacity. Imagine St. Lucia. If St. Lucians had no ability, due to being all ill with some non-communicable disease, to not be able to participate in productive activities, the street vending, the stores and businesses, business and offices, corporate environments, national organizations. Can you imagine what will happen if you went to get a birth certificate and there was no one available to serve you because there was a very high influx of NCDs and absenteeism? The actual capacity of the population will be declining. And inside of there, because of mortality, the population will also swiftly decline. Think about the birth rate, because mothers or young women who had the capacity to give birth might be so incapable of giving birth and nourishing a baby that we'd have even a population decline. And think about that burden on, again, the national insurance. Because if you have a national insurance program, it now has to stretch itself to serve the entire population. And that will cause and contribute to a burnout, because before the burnout happens, first there's a burden. Think about us walking up a hill and having not had breakfast or had a sustainable meal, substantial meal, and trying to walk up that hill for about 5 hours. Wouldn't we burn out? Wouldn't we at some point have had the burden of the wear, the clothes we were wearing? The shoes might feel tight, the perspiration gets to us, the elements gets to us, and then we burn out. So think about what will happen on a national and country level. And in the human capacity level in the workforce, there will be a decline, which will again contribute to high labor costs, because then the demand and supply would have changed, there would have been a shift, and the cost of labor would increase. And then that will contribute to a decline in the gross domestic product of the country. So on a country and national level, and if we do a multiplicity of this and think about the entire Caribbean region, and if we amplify this to the global level, we see that we would have a global decline in all of the challenges with regards to population and the gross domestic product, which are very closely connected. So how do we connect the dots that will create new conversations, new discussions around health, new discussions around the delivery of really, really good education that will then contain the population's challenges around health? We have to promote awareness. We have to start the awareness dialogue at a very early stage. Think about the fact that children are impacted by cancers, and particularly by breast cancer if a mother is affected. Think about the actual household, what happens inside of there when we talked about absenteeism, when we talk about a mother that is affected. She has the challenge of participating in nurturing, and so there's an absenteeism crisis in terms of mothering or parenting. And then let's think about the awareness as we start building the youth to understand that ailments such as these can be prevented. So we have to start discussing lifestyle changes, and that's where the awareness has to draw its biggest audiences. We talk about health, and when we speak about health, we have to talk about all of the dialogues around health. We're not just going to be talking about an unhealthy person or mortality, because when we talk about health, we tend to add mortality or death to that discussion. Let's talk about healthy living. Let's talk about early detection. Let's ask every woman in this room to understand, and every man to participate in self-examinations. Let's ask men to participate in the dialogues in the workforce about how do we engage healthy discussions about breasts and not sexualize or sensationalize the discussions around women's bodies. Let's also look at how productivity is affected, and we went through an entire discussion around productivity. But let's look at how productivity will affect from the newspaper vendor, if we had to get a newspaper and that person was not available because of an ailment and a diagnosis. Let's look at the fruit vendor, who we now have less ability to access because they have also been diagnosed and are probably in treatment and probably can't afford their treatment due to the fact that they have now lost income due to lost productivity. And let's think about the teacher, who has the ability to impart knowledge on the student body in a school, but now is absent due to an ailment, diagnosis, and because there was a lack of awareness discussions and discussions around your health and your wealth and your longevity and early detection, has now been unable and incapable of delivering that really, really good lesson in math or English or penmanship. And think about the sustainability. What drives the nation? What drives the Caribbean region? It's tourism in some instances. It might be participating in industry. But think about when there is no one to participate. So we have to connect the dots where awareness of health can open up discussions around early detection, which will positively impact productivity and will contribute to sustainability. And this is what the face of prevention looks like. Healthy and safe food supply. We need to access a healthy and safe food supply unconditionally. It doesn't have to do with the weather and the climate. It should be throughout the year. We should be using all the applications of technology, of good, sound minds who are participating in agricultural practices, the practitioners and the thought leaders who already know how to, and all we have to do is apply the what and where the land is clean and the soils are great, and we can now participate in healthy food supplies. We need to look at the contamination of our waters. We need to create safe water, potable water, accessible water. And St. Lucia has an advantage because you have innovation that is doing that, which is completely impressive globally. We need to look at our diet. We need to look at what's the coloring on our plate. Is it natural food coloring? How many colors do we have? Is it going to look balanced when we digest it? Is it going to feel good? And are we going to also reap the benefits of providing or using that energy to fuel our other activities? And then we look at the active and healthy lifestyle. Are we walking enough? Are we running enough? Are we cycling? Although unfortunately there are not many spaces and safe places for cyclists in the Caribbean, which is very unfortunate because again it's a thorough form of exercise. But we have the ocean. And one of the things we always forget is the value of the ocean in terms of our health. We can swim. We can walk on the sand. We can run on the sand. The ocean has so much potential for feeding us, nurturing us, restoring our health, and keeping us really, really entertained and engaged in terms of participating in outdoor activities. And we forget the nation. We forget the ocean, sorry. But we also need to look at reducing our stress levels. We need to attend to our stress levels and understand that we're not superheroes, and that in the superhero world, superheroes never look stressed. So we need to now adjust our stress activities or the things that contribute to stresses in our lives, and we need to say, okay, this is not important, this is critically important, and put these things into categories. We also need to replace buying with cooking. We need to understand that sometimes cooking a healthy meal takes only 30 minutes, 30. And sometimes it means that you might have to start preparing your meals differently, having vegetables cut up, maybe a week's supply of vegetables, having maybe a month's supply of seasonings and herbs cut and prepared and ready for use, so that you know that you have no excuse for cooking a healthy Caribbean meal with lovely fish from the ocean. So what are these solutions and what are these opportunities? This is a space here that we can start building community dialogues. And it's where we really, really have to learn how to speak to each other and how to embrace the safe spaces that we can create to have honest dialogues about, hey, you know something? I have not been eating healthy and I want to begin. How can you teach me how to eat healthy? How can we partner and participate and recreate at the same time? How can I say, okay, you know something, you're going to come over to my house this evening and we're going to have a potluck. I am making salad with greens from my garden. You need to bring the seasoning from your backyard. You know a fisherman in your village, bring some fish. And let's have a healthy dietary engagement tonight with fun. And maybe we could add a little bit of wine, not too much, but let's find a local winemaker and let's participate in also buying local and participating in that kind of exchange. So we're building community there. We also have to look at how we create the education that we're going to deliver. So one of the things that we've understood and established is that we needed to create sustainable education that was accessible to every single participant in the society, from the youth right up to the elderly, as well as different cross-sections in our society. And so one of the things that we find has been very, very successful is imparting knowledge and education through program development that we have been able to design. And then, of course, when we look at the sustainable nutrition and the national health policy and the program, we look at how we engage every citizen in participating so nobody gets left out of the conversation. And so, are we ready? Are we ready? Are we ready for the impact solutions? We have to start self. We have to not point the finger in the other direction, even though one always points back at us. We have to start looking at individual ownership of our actions. We then have to look at the solidarity and support and systems that we can create for that entire community to seem as if it's one unit. We have to actually put some pressure on policy makers because we have to look at the national scope. We also have to look at how the region deals with importation of toxic agricultural chemicals, for example. Because if we're thinking about our soil, we can't think about the soil of the CARICOM nation solo. We have to think about the CARICOM region because we trade in the CARICOM region. So if the soil is contaminated in one island and the food comes to another island, we have to think about how we're contributing to the degeneration of health for each other and to each other. So it's really a high responsibility we're dealing with here. Of course, we have to demonstrate the impact. And we have to demonstrate it by saying, I have eaten out of my garden yesterday. I ate out of my garden. I made ginger tea from the ginger roots that were planted in my yard. I ate a mango chow from my mango tree. I drank golden apple juice from my neighbor's yard. And then one of the things we have to do is to share the model. If it works here, it could work there. If it works for you, it can work for us. We might just have to tweak it a little bit. And then we start to feel that collective triumph, that victory, like we all won. And that feeling of all winning is amazing. And so, what we have to do is to keep in touch, to open up that discussion and that dialogue. We also have to make sure we collaborate, because that is where we really start to define the scope. And then we have to engage in thought leadership to develop that strategic roadmap. Nothing happens in isolation or in a silo. So if we're together and we're talking about something that is bugging us, if we come together and we find that solution to that thing that's bugging us, we now find that we are able to develop that strategic roadmap that again we can replicate and share and have as a very strong impact solution. So how do we do that? By touching base with each other, and that's how you find me. By my website, missbroffit.com, or by my local number, 384-4244. So, I want to thank you for our quick engagement and discussion, and of course, find us socially as well. And then, let's talk.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for Nicole. And let's talk. Any questions or comments? We have a roving microphone.
Good morning. My name is Ruven Polo and I represent Atlas. In the beginning, you mentioned breast cancer, and you were making reference to, I guess, the foods that we eat. But isn't it true that the cancer could be formed by not necessarily what we eat and like genetically or something?
Yes, absolutely. There are other ways that cancers are actually formed. Usually, it's cellular multiplication. So essentially, what we have to look at is how we put all the dots together, because lifestyle is a contributing factor. There is a strong genetic connection, and then of course there would be that entire thing around hereditary. So in terms of how cancers are actually derived or diagnosed, it is not necessarily only dietary, but we have to also consider what we're putting inside of us, because those are contributing factors, especially where there are contaminants and where there are known carcinogens, which have been over the years discussed globally, which in some instances happens that it's banned in another country or region or territory, but it's accepted in or dumped in the third world.
Hello, good morning. I'm General Brisbane Fontelio, representing Plainview Combined School. I'm happy to hear that you made mention of the impact it has on the family, the children, because most times we think of the impact cancer has on the individual and the monetary impact on the individual's pockets, and the lack of infrastructure and health to go with it. But being a teacher, I always think of the impact on the students, on the kids, and we need to have something in place where we could have counseling for them, a safe haven, have a follow-up plan for in case the main breadwinner or the main caregiver has cancer and dies, a single parent. What can we do as a society, as a school, as a nation? What can we do? What is put in place for these children? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's important because, we always forget that we have this rippling effect that a diagnosis of any ailment, and particularly of cancer, can cause in a society and in a household. And so there are, and yesterday I mentioned it at the People's Forum, that there should be a psychosocial community and space that attends to not just the children, but even the spouses. Because sometimes spouses do not understand the journey, and there may be a challenge inside of there in terms of domestic issues. And we want to make sure that we secure every single pocket of our population. We don't want to leave anyone behind, because that inclusive approach to any form of treatment is always what gives you the best outcome. So for us and for the organization that I represent, for us the innovation starts by opening up dialogues to speak to every single part of our society. And if we start with the youth, we have a healthier longevity map, because sustainability comes in, because the youths are open to having these discussions. Because I remember in the Caribbean, or even globally, where we didn't even mention the word cancer. Do you all remember that? We only gave it this power of being this powerful letter of the alphabet. But when we change the conversation and we change the way we refer to it, we start understanding that it's okay to talk about, it's okay to be diagnosed, early detection is important, it's okay to talk to girls about their bodies, it's okay to empower young men and boys and husbands and employers who are male, it's okay to go into the corporate environment and speak to the leaders in the organizations, and then we realize it's just okay. And then we also acknowledge that it's okay to have these conversations in the faith-based community. A woman in the church is just a woman who just might also be in the corporate workplace, who might also be a mother, who might also ... So guess what? She has a husband, she may have sons, and everybody is affected and impacted.